the same day, she takes her full ordination in front of the Dear Sangha. Throughout the ordination process, mindful and attentive. First part, receiving the Brahmacharya basic ordination in Bhikshuni Sangha, the sixth samana is to be informed of the authorized ordination platform territory and also the common communion territory surrounding it. She is then aware that the quorum of 12 qualified bhikshunis is selected for conferring the full ordination. They gather in harmony and enter the ordination platform. In the midst of the Bhikshuni Sangha, the sixth samana wholeheartedly invites and takes dependence on the Upadayani, who is at least 12 years seniority and who has acquired the consent of the Bhikshuni Sangha by an Actividya karma. Then she determined her 5 ropes and a bow in front of her Upadayani. She then received the questioning concerning the obstructing factors thrice, once outside and the other inside the assembly. The sixth samana, with a perfect mindset and a conscious intention, requests a Brahmacharya basic ordination in the midst of the Bhikshuni Sangha by uttering her own name, the name of her Upadayani, as well as expressing her wish to receive the Brahmacharya basic ordination from the Bhikshuni Sangha. The sixth samana formally received the Brahmacharya basic ordination through an Actividya karma. This is done by the Bhikshuni Karma Master, who announced the transaction statements in the following sequence. First, she called on the attention of the Bhikshuni Sangha. Second, uttered the name of the ordainee's Upadayani. Third, she stated the ordainee's qualification and her request. Now, I mentioned something about the ordainee's qualification. First, the Bhikshuni Sangha has given her 2 years of studies in the 6 rules and 6 subordinate rules. Second, she has studied for 2 years in the 6 rules and 6 subordinate rules. Third, she has declared her purity in the study of 2 years, in the 2 years study in the 6 rules and 6 subordinate rules. And then the fourth, she should be free from all the obstructing factors. Fourth, complete the karma of one motion and kamavajrana and conclude that the Bhikshuni Sangha has in agreement conferred the Brahmacharya basic ordination on so-and-so with so-and-so as the Upadayani. At this point, the sixth samana accomplished the Brahmacharya basic ordination and can be called a Brahmacharya Bhikshuni in this context. Within the same day, the Upadayani will take the 11 Bhikshunis and the ordainee to meet with the Bhikshu Sangha for the full ordination. The quorum of the Dear Sangha can be made up of 10 Bhikshus and 12 Bhikshunis from different Vinaya traditions. Let us learn from the ancient masters such as Rapsal of Zan, who revived the Tibetan Bhikshu ordination lineage with the help of 2 Chinese Dhammabuddha Bhikshus, Jivan and Jivan. Tibetan monks ordained under this lineage went back to Wei and Chan of Tibet and revived the Bhikshu ordination there, which is referred to as the Lower Road Vinaya lineage. What we would like to emphasize here is that we should follow exactly what the Vinaya says. In this way, we are carrying on the Buddha's lineage as well as eliminating future doubts and obstacles. Thus, ensure the steady growth of the Bhikshuni Sangha. Therefore, we sincerely suggest the dual Sangha ordination rite is that establishing of the Mulasavativada Bhikshuni ordination lineage. Now we come to the second part and receiving the full ordination in the Dear Sangha. The Brahmacharya Bhikshuni is to be informed of the ordination platform territory, which has been authorized by the Bhikshu and Bhikshunis respectively, because a territory authorized by the Bhikshu only is not a valid territory for the Bhikshunis. Then, she is aware that the quorum of 10 qualified Bhikshus and 12 qualified Bhikshunis gather together in harmony on the authorized ordination platform. So with such a perfect mindset and conscious intention, requests full ordination in the midst of the Dev Sangha by uttering her own name, the name of the Upadayani, as well as expressing her wish to receive the full ordination from the Dev Sangha. At this point, she is questioned with regard to the obstructing factors in the midst of the Dev Sangha by the Bhikshuni Karma Master, who appoints himself through Anati Karma. Being free from the obstructing factors, she obtains her full ordination through Anatika Tuta Karma. This is done by the Bhikshu Karma Masters, who announce the transaction statements in the following sequence. Call under the attention of the Bhikshuni Sangha. Utter the name of the ordainees of Dayani. State the ordainee's qualification and request. Then, by this time, the ordainees. Okay. Her qualification. The Bhikshuni Sangha has given her 2 years of studies in the 6 rules and 6 subordinate rules. She has studied for 2 years in the 6 rules and 6 subordinate rules. The Bhikshuni has conferred on her the Brahmacharya basic ordination. She can serve the Bhikshunis well and her behavior are pleasing to them. She is pure and abide by the precepts. She did not commit any fault in the midst of the Bhikshuni Sangha. Commit the common of 1 portion and 3 kamavajjanas, and conclude the Dev Sangha as an agreement confer the ordination on so-and-so with so-and-so as the Upadayani. By then, an invisible accent of the precept were found in the newly ordained Bhikshuni. She has obtained her Bhikshuni nature. Thus, with this legally conduct full Bhikshuni ordination ceremony, the Mulasavastivada Bhikshuni lineage is legally established. The fully ordained Mulasavastivada Bhikshuni is given the date and time for receiving the full ordination. Then she is told the 3 supports, the ik downforce, the ik rules to be respected, the 4 things a samana should do, and finally the exhortation of future studies and the practice. After the ordination, in relation to the Bhikshuni Sangha, the newly ordained Bhikshuni must take dependence on the Upadayani for at least 5 years or more. The Upadayani should teach her the Vinaya in relation to the following matters. The importance of depending on the Dev Sangha is to protect the Dharma Vinaya passed down from the Buddha and to safeguard the steady growth of the Bhikshuni Sangha. To be thorough in one's study and practice of the Vinaya, and should enter into 3 months rain retreats instead of wandering around. To keep one's purity by repenting the committed offense, as well as participate in the fortnightly Pratimoksara recitation and the invitation at the end of the ring retreats. To have equal shares on all the necessary daily requisites such as food, medicine, clothing, and lodging. To respect and live harmonious with other Bhikshunis who are in the same training and in the livelihood. She should take her along and guide her with endurance and compassion. Together they practice ethics, meditation, and wisdom diligently to be liberated from the cyclic existence and to reach nirvana. Now, in relate with the Bhikshu Sanghas, the Upadayani should be responsible in guiding the newly ordained Bhikshuni to manage the following Dev Sangha monastic affairs. First, the conferring of the Bhikshuni full ordination by the Dev Sangha. Second, the Bhikshuni Sangha through Anatividya Karma upon one qualified Bhikshuni to go to the Bhikshu Sangha to ask for the bi-monthly exhortation. A qualified Vinaya Dara Bhikshu should be appointed to give advice to the Bhikshuni Sangha. Third, the bi-monthly recitation of the Pratimosa precepts in a place where there are Bhikshus around. Fourth, during the ring retreats, a respected elder Bhikshuni in representing the Bhikshuni Sangha should go to the qualified Vinaya Dara Bhikshu to ask for independence. Having finished the ring retreats, the Bhikshuni should invite both Sanghas to point out their faults in regard to the 3 things the offense is sin, hurt, and is suspected to have committed. On transgressing a Sanghavasa offense, the Bhikshuni should undergo manakta penance by a quorum of at least 4 Bhikshus and 4 Bhikshunis. To rehabilitate a Bhikshuni Sanghavasa offense, a quorum of at least 20 Bhikshus and 20 Bhikshuni must be presented. The newly ordained Bhikshuni will gradually realize that the Dev Sangha not only transmit to her the Bhikshuni full ordination, they continue to instruct and guide her in the study and practice of Dhamma Vinaya as well as protect her in the purity and tranquility. She feels her own steady growth in the harmonious, pure, and peaceful Bhikshuni Sangha. With the fulfillment of the requirement in each phase of the ordination process, a complete, thoughtful, and legitimate ordination is imparted and accomplished. Such a wholesome process entails the steady growth of an unblemished and harmonious Bhikshuni Sangha. In this way, the Buddha's true intent in transmitting the full ordination to prosper the dual Sangha who will protect the Dharma and Vinaya is fulfilled. Thank you very much.
I have to ask Venerable Lobsang Shastri, who is sitting in the translator cabin, to please join us for Tibetan English.
First of all, I make salutation to His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, who gave me the full ordination, and I make great respect to the audience here at the Bhikshu Sanghas and Bhikshuna Sanghas and other delegations who are present here, and especially I have a little bit studied and researched the three existing lineages of the Vinaya traditions of the three lineages. So on that basis, I will just speak a little bit on this subject. Actually, the introductory of my paper is that I have tried to research the existing, Vinaya traditions of these three Nikayas, and dealt with this thing in very minutely, all those indications of the Vinaya rules. And I have, although it took many years of research given on my shoulder, and there are so many lacks in myself, so I could not just publish, but it was very lately published with 3 volumes and 8 chapters on that, and so this is a very brief summary I'm going to just include here about that, and then I will just skip more of the introductions part, and then I will just come to the vital point where about the restoration of Bhikshuna Vinaya entail.
You hear it right. Both Munasabas divided Bhikshu and Bhikshunis. But we all know there is no Sabas dividing Bhikshunis. I will explain later. Okay. Now the first option is by Tibetan Munasabas Divata Bhikshu Sangha alone. Now we can find the following quotation in the in which the Buddha allowed the Bhikshu Sangha to ordain Bhikshuni. For example, like Pali Theravada Vinaya, it says Mahapajapati was ordained by receiving the 8 Guru Dharmas from the Buddha, and she then asked the Buddha how her 500 women followers should be ordained. And the Buddha said, "Oh, monks, I allow bhikshus to receive the upasampada from bhikshus." And also in the first Guru Dharma in the Tibetan Munasavastivadin Vinaya, the fourth Guru Dharma in the Chinese Dhammakupa Vinaya and the Chinese Savastivadin Vinaya, they all say that women are expected to ordain from the bhikshu. So, in other words, a bhikshu sangha alone can ordain bhikshunis. Now, according to this text, these four schools allow the bhikshu of the Tibetan Munasavastivada Vinaya tradition alone to conduct the bhikshuni ordination. However, a dual ordination was still after a dual ordination was introduced later. It is started with a case of some women who felt lost and ashamed that they could not answer the questions of hundreds. So the Buddha said, "I allow monks ordination in the order of monks after she has been ordained on one side and has cleared herself in the order of nuns." Now, after the introduction of the dual ordination, the later rite of the ordination was supposed to replace the earlier ones. For example, the Buddha said, after the ordination of the Jnati Chatuta Karma was established, the ordination by the 3 refugees cannot be upasampada anymore. Even so, we cannot find in the Vinaya that the Buddha denounced the validity of the ordination by the bhikshu alone. However, according to I would say the Chinese, famous Chinese Vinaya master Lao Xuan, when he was asked it is okay to be ordained by one sangha alone, he replied, even a bhikshuni ordination is transmitted directly from a bhikshu sangha without first confirming the Brahmacharya vow, that is basic dharma in Chinese. It is still valid, as nowhere in the Vinaya indicate otherwise. However, the precept master commits an offense. Okay. Now, the advantage of this procedure is that it does not require the involvement of other Buddhist tradition, and thus simple and not complicated. After 12 years, when the first group of ordained Tibetan bhikshuni has 12 vasa, they will be eligible to be precept master. From now, then on, Tibetan bhikshuni, together with the Tibetan bhikshus, can conduct the dual ordination. Now, the disadvantage of this option is that in the Vinaya, there is no source that specifies that bhikshuni can be ordained by bhikshu alone. There's nothing like we can find. Furthermore, this procedure may be criticized by being incomplete. Even the ordained get the ordination, but still the ordination is incomplete. They might be criticized by later generations. Like the first ordination in China in 357. Now, furthermore, Tibetan Buddhism may be questioned why it would choose single ordination while Bhikshuni Sangha are available in China, in Taiwan, in Korea, in Vietnam now. Okay, now that's the first option. The second option is that dual ordination by Dhammakupa Bhikshunis and Munasabastivadin Bhikshus. And I don't think I have time to give you all the citation. I'm sure you know already. Okay. So anyway, we can find at least 4 sources that indicates women Shishavana, after studying 2 years of 6 dhammas, she is required to get full ordination from Bhikshu and Bhikshuni Sanghas. So I'm not going to read the quotation to you again. Okay. Now, so in theory and in practice, Tibetan nuns can be ordained by a dual Sangha of Munasabastivada and Dhammakupa Sanghas. And the procedure, the detailed procedure will be explained by women. Okay. Now, this second option actually is the right, a very correct one. Now, but it is questioned by some Tibetans. They are concerned with 2 things. The first thing is that they question that there will be a combination of 2 different traditions, Dhammakupa and Munasabastivada. But our argument is that it is okay, it is possible, it is valid to mix 2 traditions. The reason is we all come from the Buddha, right? All the traditions come from the Buddha. So there's no question to mix 2 together. That's one argument. And the other argument is there is a precedent in Tibetan history. And you all know the history that the Tibetan Sangha was revived by 3 Tibetan monks and 2 Chinese monks. And apparently that is a mix of 2 traditions. Okay, I don't have time. I think the venerable children will explain to you tomorrow. Okay. and okay, now I'll go to the third option. Okay. Now the third option, I just told you that it's an option of donation by Munasabastivadin Bhikshu and Bhikshuni. Now where are the Bhikshuni? Where do they come from? Okay, over the past few decades, many Western and non-Western Bhikshunis in Tibetan Buddhist tradition were ordained by Dhammakupa Bhikshu and Bhikshuni Sanghas in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Korea. Many of them have been ordained for more than 20 years. And although they practice Tibetan Buddhism, their ordination has never been recognized by Tibetan Buddhism. I would suggest that the Tibetan Sangha, led by His Holiness, bestow them the Bhikshuni ordination so that they can become Munasabastivadin Bhikshus. Okay? And since they have proved themselves in every aspect as outstanding Bhikshuni, and they already have the required seniority and are virtuous enough to be eligible for precept masters, they can immediately join the Tibetan Sangha to give a dual ordination to Tibetan nuns. Right away. This is very personal. I have been a friend to these outstanding Tibetan nuns, and I'm so moved by them. they are virtuous, they are hardworking, they are, excuse me, I don't know how to, how to describe them, but they just move me to tears. And they are in every way a Tibetan Bhikshuni. And please, Tibetan Sangha, Tibetan Buddhists, you should recognize them as your own. Okay? And in fact, there is a precedent for this mode of ordination. That is revival of recent Theravada Bhikshuni ordination in Sri Lanka in 1998. 20 outstanding 10 precept Sri Lankan nuns were ordained by an international Bhikshu and Bhikshuni Sangha of Dhammapada, Theravada, and Mulasabhativada in Bulgaria. Understanding the sensitive issues that might arise, 10 most senior Sri Lankan Bhikshu arranged another ordination for this group of newly ordained Sri Lankan Bhikshunis and Sanas. Now, the ordination was conducted purely by Theravada monks, supporting their action with the allowance of the Buddha. That is, monk, I allow you to ordain, to give ordination to Bhikshunis. Okay? Now, with this ordination, the newly ordained Sri Lankan Bhikshuni were accepted as Theravada Bhikshuni. Now, the Tibetan Bhikshu Sangha can do exactly the same as Sri Lankan Bhikshu did. Now, I don't have too much time left. Okay, now personally, 2 minutes, okay. Now personally, I will support whichever option His Holiness and the Tibetan Sangha choose. Whichever, among these three, no other choice. But these three choices, whichever they choose, I will support. And I think we have come to a turning point in the Tibetan history. Now, we Buddhist women is eternally, forever grateful to who? Ananda, right? Because he pleaded to the Buddha to allow us to become, to join the order. Now is the time for us, everyone here, to plead to His Holiness and the Tibetan Sangha to allow Tibetan women to be ordained. So, let us do that day after tomorrow when His Holiness comes. Okay?
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, the Venerable Jampa Chitta. And good afternoon, Venerable Sangha members, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor and pleasure to be here on this special occasion to share an humble inquiry concerning the lineage of Bhikkhuni ordination. I would like to give...
And only one of the nuns' ordination, namely Dharmaguptaka. With respect to the establishment of a Bhikshuni lineage within the Mulasabhastivada tradition, two options are discussed, leaving aside the many variants possible in detail. First, to introduce the Bhikshuni lineage from the Dharmaguptaka tradition into the Mulasabhastivada tradition, or second, to create a new Bhikshuni lineage within the Mulasabhastivada tradition by ordaining women through monks. Reintroducing monks' ordinations from other subgroups within the same tradition is attested to in the Theravada tradition as a common practice. These other subgroups dogmatically and from the point of view of Vinaya belong to the same school. Nevertheless, the subgroups often differ with respect to the ordination lineage, either on account of variations in the development in other geographical areas, or on account of different interpretations of Vinaya rules connected with the ordination. Reintroducing an ordination lineage from a different Vinaya tradition is similar to the reintroduction of an ordination lineage from another subgroup of the same Vinaya school, with one difference, that the deviations are more plentiful, because in the case of different Vinaya schools, intact law systems develop differently during more than 2,000 years. In case of the interruption of the ordination lineage of any of the three Vinaya schools existing at present, male individuals seeking for ordination in the Buddhist community would have the possibility to reintroduce a Vinaya tradition from one of the other two traditions. Since no monk of the former tradition would be left who could oppose to the reintroduction of this new Vinaya tradition, the new tradition would be accepted universally. In case of bhikshuni ordinations, however, the problem arises that a bhikshuni has to undergo a legal procedure, be it ordination or brahmacharya upasthana in the bhikshuni sangha first, and thereafter the ordination in a bhikshu sangha, in the case of the Mula Savastivada, in a bhikshu and a bhikshuni sangha. Thus, the bhikshunis are not able to simply introduce an ordination lineage from another tradition, but need the acceptance of the bhikshu sangha of the tradition into which they introduced the bhikshuni ordination. Thus, not only the nuns, but also the monks have to agree. In the present case, that means that bhikshus of the Mula Savastivada tradition would have to accept the bhikshuni ordination of the Dharmaguptaka tradition and have to perform the legal procedure of ordaining women within a bhikshu sangha, united with the bhikshuni sangha consisting of Dharmaguptaka nuns. One of the preconditions would be the acceptance of the Dharmaguptaka bhikshuni lineage and implicitly the Dharmaguptaka bhikshu lineage as a valid Asian tradition by the Mula Savastivada bhikshu sangha. This validity depends on an uninterrupted chain of names of individuals belonging to an ordination lineage going back to the times of the Buddha, and on the acceptance of the legal procedures with which these ordinations were performed during more than 2,500 years. It will be difficult, if not impossible, for every tradition to prove both points. This is not a problem as long as a tradition uses only its own history, since a tradition will accept its own lineage as pure even if it is not possible to give an uninterrupted list of names. But it might be a problem as soon as one tradition regards the other one. A second point is whether the Mula Savastivada tradition can accept the way in which the Dharmaguptaka tradition performs the legal procedure of ordination and all legal procedures connected therewith from a judicial point of view. In general, the indisputable nature of the legal procedure of ordination is to be known by the complete suitability according to 4 points. The first is the subject matter, which refers to the candidate of ordination. The second is the legal procedure itself, consisting of a motion, jñapti, and proclamations, anusravana. The third is the boundary in which the ordination takes place, the sima. And the fourth is the assembly itself, the parishad. It is these 4 points which I call presuppositions for the validity of a legal procedure, and not minor points as the question whether a bhikshuni is ordained having a preceptor, having her robes, etc., which do not necessarily invalidate an ordination. As to the first point, the object of ordination, the preconditions to be fulfilled are practically the same in both traditions. Namely, one is not allowed to ordain someone who is less than 20, respectively 12 years old or married, or someone who previously committed an extreme offense, or someone belonging to the 11 unqualified individuals. The female person seeking for ordination nowadays has to have successfully completed her time as a shikshamana. Dharmaguptakas and Mula Savastivadin differ with respect to the number of rules to be observed by a shikshamana. The Dharmaguptaka have 6 rules, the Mula Savastivadin 12. And they differ regarding the content of the rules. Whether the discrepancy is as big as it seems to be at first sight is uncertain in consideration of the circumstance that Shikshamanas in all traditions had to comply with not only the special rules for Shikshamanas, but with nearly all rules for Bhikshunis. It mainly depends on this question whether the Mula Savastivadin can accept the Bhikshuni ordinations of the Dharmaguptakas from the point of view of the object of ordination. The second point, the Kamavachala itself. For an ordination to be legally valid, it is important that the formulas with which the ordinations in the Bhikshuni Sangha and Bhikshu Sangha are performed are correctly spoken, which means correctly concerning the word order as well as the pronunciation. The formulas used by the Dharmaguptaka and by the Mula Savastivada tradition respectively are divergent. The Mula Savastivada tradition has the historically most developed formulas of all Vinaya traditions. There, the age of the candidate, her having a robe and bowl, her having received the training in the 12 rules for Shikshamanas, her having completed this training, her having received the allowance of Brahmacharya Upasthana, her being free from stumbling blocks, etc., are mentioned. Though the formulas of the Dharmaguptaka also mention that the candidate is free from the stumbling blocks, 20 years old, has her robes, etc., they are not as detailed as those of the Mula Savastivadin. Thus, from the point of view of the ordination formulas, the Bhikshuni ordination of the Dharmaguptakas cannot be accepted by the Mula Savastivada tradition and vice versa. Third, for the performance of a legal procedure, a Sangha has to assemble in full number within a ceremonial boundary, Sima. If this Sima is defective, then all legal procedures performed within it are defective too. Among the Buddhist schools with the known Vinaya tradition, the Dharmaguptaka and the Mula Savastivadin are most similar with respect to the question of the monastic boundary. Both schools differentiate between a great Sima and a small Sima already in their Vinayas. Both had down lists of objects allowed as marks for the great and for the small Sima, etc. A general difference between the formulas for determining Simas of the Dharmaguptaka and the Mula Savastivadin is that the Mula Savastivadin list each object announced as a mark for the respective Sima, whereas the Dharmaguptaka summarizingly state that the marks have been announced. From the point of view of the small Sima, the existing divergences are relatively small. Judging the validity of the Dharmaguptaka ordination lineage from the point of view of Sima, the Mula Savastivadin might object to the great Sima, since in the Dharmaguptaka tradition it includes villages and their surroundings. Hardly any objections presumably should be raised regarding the small Sima. However, since it is unknown in what type of Sima the ordinations of the past 2,500 years have taken place, one cannot be sure that the chosen Simas would have been acceptable for the Mula Savastivadin in each case. And a further point is that the formulas with which the Dharmaguptaka and the Mula Savastivadin determine their respective Simas deviate from each other. Though the differences with respect to Sima are minor ones, it probably would be difficult for the Mula Savastivadin to accept the ordinations of the Dharmaguptaka from the point of view of Sima. Fourth, the Parishad, the assembly. For the performance of a legally valid procedure, the assembly has to be suitable, which means that all monks, respectively all nuns within the Sima, have to participate in procedure. All who are absent have to give their consent, and no protest concerning the procedure must be made. As is well known, a bhikshuni is ordained by undergoing first a legal procedure within the Bhikshuni Sangha, and second, in a Bhikshu Sangha, or in the case of the Mula Savastivadin, by a Bhikshu and a Bhikshuni Sangha. However, there are differences regarding the way in which the ordination within the Bhikshu Sangha is performed. In the Dharmaguptaka tradition, the female candidate asks the Bhikshu Sangha for ordination, and a monk who acts as the Kamkaraka asks the Bhikshu Sangha to confer the Upasampada on the candidate. In the Mula Savastivada tradition, not only the candidate for ordination, but a Sangha of at least 12 nuns goes to a Bhikshu Sangha of at least 10 monks. The Bhikshu Sangha and the Bhikshuni Sangha each are placed within a small Sima, thus forming two separate, independent Sanghas. The candidate for ordination sits in front of the Bhikshu Sangha and asks for ordination. A monk acting as a Kammakaraka speaks the ordination formula in which both Sanghas, the Bhikshu Sangha and the Bhikshuni Sangha, are addressed. Thus, the legal procedure is performed by a double assembly within two different semas, and both assemblies have to agree. Thus, from the point of view of Parishad, the method of the Mula Savastivada differs considerably from that of the Dhammaguptaka. From the perspective of Orthodox Vinaya, according to these 4 points, it will not be possible for Mula Savastivadin to accept Dhammaguptaka ordinations in a way which allows them to carry out formal procedures together. The option to establish a nun's ordination lineage within the Mula Savastivada tradition by introducing the Dhammaguptaka Bhikshuni Sangha, therefore, could only be realized if the whole Mula Savastivada Bhikshu Sangha anonymously were to accept to go new ways. For example, to create a mixed Vinaya tradition of Dhammaguptaka and Mula Savastivadin, at least for nuns, which then would represent a new subgroup of the Dhammaguptaka nuns, or, alternatively, applying a method developed in the Theravada tradition, namely to perform a so-called Dalhi Kama, a strengthening procedure. This type of legal procedure is not testified in the canonical scriptures, but only in the commentarial layers of the Theravada, and there in the context of the defective pronunciation of a formula for a legal procedure. Nevertheless, the usage of Dalhi Kamas is or was very common in Burma, Thailand and Sri Lanka in context of ordination. In order that guests and hosts could perform legally valid procedures together without fear that a possibly defective ordination of one of the two parties would invalidate the procedures commonly performed, the guests were reordained by the hosts. In that way, a monk could receive many ordinations by Dalhi Kamas through his life. Applied to the present case, the Mula Savastivada monks could reordain the Dhammaguptaka nuns who want to become Mula Savastivadin with a formula for ordaining monks. Thereafter, the nuns would be Dhammaguptaka as well as Mula Savastivadin, and the nuns could perform a Mula Savastivada Bhikshuni Sangha, acting together with the Mula Savastivada Bhikshu Sangha. The commentaries of the Theravada tradition give ample evidence that in the long history of Buddhism, innovations with respect to rules of the Vinaya were the rule and not the exception. This certainly is not different in other traditions. However, it would certainly be less controversial to establish the Bhikshuni lineage within the Mula Savastivada tradition by ordaining the female candidates through a Mula Savastivada Bhikshu Sangha, and then to hand over the task of giving the Brahmacharya Upasthana to the nuns, as it had been done in the beginning when the first order of nuns was established. Thank you.
Venerable members of the Sangha and dear participants of the conference, as you can see, the title of my paper is Novices, Shramaniris, and Probationers, Shikshamanas in the Dhammaguptaka tradition. All Buddhist traditions of legal text, Vinaya text, explain how a young girl first has to become a probationer before she can receive the full ordination. In most traditions, this obligation is included in the 8 fundamental rules, Guru Dharma, accepted by Mahatma Jabati as a condition to create a nun's order. The probationary period lasts for 2 years and as a rule starts at the age of 18. An exception is made for married women, at least as it is understood in later Vinaya passages, as been discussed also by Professor von Hinnerus, or certainly also by the Chinese translators. All Vinayas contain specific regulations for this probationary period, but as we will see, these regulations raise a lot of questions. These questions were introduced in China at the time of the Vinaya translations. Given the many different ideas on the probation period expressed by Buddhist commentators since the time of the introduction of the Vinayas in China, it is the aim of this presentation to see how the regulations on the probation period entered China and how in the course of time they were interpreted and possibly applied by the Chinese Buddhist masters. To this purpose, a detailed look at all veneer regulations of the Shikshamana status imposes itself. Following humbly the Chinese masters, I will use as a reference point the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya while comparing it to the other Chinese Vinayas for all relevant information. Although the Pali Vinaya never reached Buddhist Vinaya commentators, the Chinese version of the 4th or 5th century Sinhalese commentary on it, the Samantapasadika, did. In my comparative study, I therefore also pay attention to the Pali Vinaya. The first part of the presentation traces the Vinaya regulations for the probationer and formulates possible answers to some uncertainties that appear. Due to time limits, I have to restrict myself to only a few striking points. In the second part, I will briefly focus on the Chinese Buddhist masters and their interpretation or application of these Vinaya regulations. Let's have a look at now one basic question. Basic rules for the probation period. Based on the accounts of the Guru Dharmas and on the description of the admission ceremony of a probationer, it is clear that according to several Vinayas, among which the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, one first has to be a novice in order to become a probationer. In theory, however, it does not necessarily imply that all novices first have to become a probationer before they can be admitted to the full ordination ceremony. In theory, still, it could be seen as a free choice. However, as we will see, the Vinaya precepts on the ordination of women, as outlined in Bhikshuni Vibhanga, seem not to leave much room for any other interpretation than that a woman has to take 3 steps towards a full membership of the community. First, she becomes a novice, then a probationer, and as a probationer, she can undergo the full ordination ceremony. Most of these precepts on ordination belong to the Pachitika category, except for one precept that is considered by all Vinayas to be a Sanghavashesha. Let us have a look at just one of these Prachitika precepts. Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, Prachitika 122, says that a nun commits Prachitika in case she does not give 2 years of study of the precepts to a girl, Twomini, of 18, but still confers on her the ordination when she is fully 20 years old. The commentary following the precepts made clear that a girl of 18 cannot be given the ordination without a prior probationary study period of 2 years. It is striking, however, that the precept does not say that a novice of 18 ought to be given a probationary study period, but only mentions the term girl, as opposed to married woman. So in theory, it is not fully impossible to surmise that not all novices of 18 fall under the rule. Still, given the fact that the rules given to Mahaprajapati, including the rule on the probation period, concern all women who follow in her footsteps, and given the fact that the term girl, Twomini, is generally used in opposition to the term married woman, and never in opposition to the term novice, the latter reasoning seems highly unlikely. The other Vinayas point in the same direction, sometimes even more explicitly, such as in the Pali Vinaya, Mahishasaka Vinaya, and the Sarvastivada Vinaya, that all say that all novices should become probationer. To conclude this point, we can say that in Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, it is stated that 1. A probationer has to study 2 years before she can be ordained. 2. And I will give you this. 2. That one has to be a novice before one can become a probationer. And 3. That the girl always has to undergo the probationary period before she can be ordained. Since the term girl is opposed to the term married woman and not to the term novice, it is very improbable that we have to interpret the above differently than that every girl of 18, and thus every novice of 18, has to undergo the probation period before she can be ordained. The latter is explicitly stated in the Pali Vinaya, the Mahishasaka Vinaya, and the Sarvastivada Vinaya. And I will add to the former speaker that there are even passages that when there is a sex change, that one should reconsider this Shikshamana period, because when a man turns into a bhikshuni, is he or she then really a bhikshuni without having gone through the Shikshamana period? And this is a serious discussion in Vinaya passages. So let me now go to the evolution of the probationary period. Now I will skip this point since it has been discussed by many other speakers. I will just say that I fully agree with the fact that the probationary period is introduced. It's a later development and it was not there from the start. This brings me then to questions on the probation period. Now there are certainly many questions that we can ask ourselves on this probation period, and I will just here have the time to quickly look at 3 questions. The first one is, why has the probation period been imposed? Now, there are actually passages in the Vinaya that explicitly discuss this matter. And in addition, given to the reasons for the Guru Dharmas in general, a few Vinaya passages try to explain why a woman has to go through this probation period. The Pali Vinaya, for instance, the Mahishasaka Vinaya, and the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya underline that the probation has to study the 6 rules of probation for a period of 2 years. If not, she will remain ignorant on what is allowable and on what is not, making it impossible for her to get an ordination. Somehow enigmatically, the Mahasangika Vinaya forwards as a reason for the probation period the determination of the right age of the candidate. I must say I do not fully understand this reasoning. Only a candidate of 20 years old, when not married, can obtain the ordination, and in order to be sure, this is said by the Mahasangika Vinaya, in order to be sure that she is 20 years old, she first has to go through a probation period of 2 years. Pregnancy control, often set by Chinese masters to be the reason for the probation period, is actually given as an answer only in the Sarvastivana Vinaya. Finally, in the Mula Sarvastivana Vinaya, the story seems to get a more positive turn. The probation period is presented as an upward step towards ordination. Since one can only be ordained at a relatively late age, young women who are actually fully ready to assume the tasks of a grown-up are granted the possibility to gain more responsibilities at an earlier age than the ordination age, and thus can become probationer. Only after that period, they can obtain the full ordination. I should add also that no Vinaya discusses why the ordination period takes 2 years and not 3 or 1. And we could add this to the question of pregnancy, of course. I mean, why to wait 2 years to see if someone is pregnant or not? So this is not discussed. Is the probation period a step forwards? Now this is a very technical question, so I can only give here my conclusion. At least in the Mahishasaka and Dharmaguptaka Vinayas, the difference between a novice and a probationer appears to be only formal. Still, since the admission ceremony of probationer is a lot more elaborated than the procedure of the going forth of a novice, the social rank of probationer seems to be higher. Their rights and duties within the Bhikshuni Sangha, however, are, according to the above 2 Vinaya traditions, essentially the same. Thirdly, do probationers live in the nunnery just as novices do? I will be very brief here and just say that according to my research, the answer is yes. Let me turn as a final step to the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya in China. As said above, the Vinayas clearly point out that the probationer stands between the novice and the nun. This is also the case in Dharmaguptaka Vinaya, the reference Vinaya in China since the early 8th century. Still, the question remains what happened to this intermediary stage once nunneries were established in China. Was it applied, and if so, how was it applied? The second part of this presentation, very briefly, gives the results of research I did on this subject. Let's first have a look at the Bhikshuni Juan biographies of nuns. Biographies of nuns have rarely been compiled. There is, however, one famous exception. Between 516 and 519, the monk Lao Chan finished his overview of 65 biographies of nuns who lived between the late 3rd and the early 6th century. These biographies never mention the probation period as a step taken by one of the nuns. They strongly suggest that this intermediate period was not applied in China. This is not all that surprising. The nun's ordination in China was at first a mere copy of the monk's ordination, and only after the translation of the 4 Vinayas in the beginning of the 5th century, questions were raised as to the validity of this procedure. The focus lied on the fact that, contrary to what the Vinayas prescribed, the nuns in China had been ordained in the presence of monk witnesses only. It led to the request to hold a second ordination, this time in the presence of legally ordained nuns of Sri Lanka. The request was granted, and the second ordination, as you all know, has consequently been carried out circa 433 in the capital of the southern Song dynasty. Despite the fact that no biography mentions a probation period followed by one of the nuns, the Bhikshuni Juan, in a discussion between a nun and a Vinaya master, still contains an intriguing reference to a study period. When the nun Huigua asked the Central Asian Vinaya master Guru Varman whether nuns who have received full ordination from the monk's order only have been legally ordained, the Vinaya master answers that full ordination can in fact be considered as invalid only, the question mark, when a candidate receives the ordination without having studied the rules for 2 years in a nunnery. This corresponds to the guidelines for the ordination ceremony of women as formulated in the Vinayas. Pressed by further questions, Guru Varman further focuses on the witnesses required to hold a legally structured ordination ceremony, and the question of the probation remains unsolved. When we have then a final look at the commentaries of the Tang Vinaya masters, and especially Tao Xuan, we will see that he has clear ideas on the probationer status. However, the Shiksamana period seems not to have been actually applied in the Chinese monasteries. On the other hand, I Ching's travel account, although it does not give many details on the position of a probationer, at least proves the existence of the probationer status in India at the time of I Ching's study period in Nalanda. He also confirms the intermediate status of a probationer. Her position is lower than a nun and higher than a novice. The travel account finally suggests that the probationer status is also not fully unknown in China, since I Ching seems to expect that his readership will understand the term Zhongshuminyu, a woman who is studying a translation of Shikshamana. Now to conclude, it seems safe to say that according to all Vinayas, the full ordination can only be conferred on a woman who has completed the probationary period of 2 years. This was, in all probability, not the case at the start of the nun's order, but was the result of a later development in China. The probationer status, at least formally, seems never to have been introduced in China, although a few Vinaya masters pleaded for it. Interesting in this context is an isolated comment on the term Shikshamana, and you can read the conclusion with me. So interesting in this context is an isolated comment on the term Shikshamana in the Chinese Buddhist encyclopedia of the 11th century. The author compares a probation to a woman with long hair who lives among the nuns. This points to it that there were women who lived in close relation with the nuns, but who kept their lay status as shown by the long hair. There is no question, however, of a formal intermediary step between a novice and a nun. So I hope that my presentation shows again how evolution is an integral part of the Vinaya traditions, of all Vinaya traditions, from the early period, from the early times on. So my question would be, why not to continue this Vinaya tradition? I thank you for your attention.
Welcome to Indonesia.
Good afternoon, everyone. This paper is mainly concerned with the historical revival of a dual ordination to nuns in the modern period. It focuses on the revival of a dual ordination for Korean nuns, as well as some issues on the observance of the ordination procedure required for nuns in the Souvenir or the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya in the Korean historical and social context. This paper is divided into 4 parts. In the first part, I discuss Vinaya Master Chaung's dedication tutoring Buddhist monastic disciplinary text to Korean monks and nuns. In the second part, I examine the role of Master Chaung in reviving the practice of a dual ordination, and the historical revival ordination for Korean nuns in October 1982. In the third part, I investigate some issues related to observe the procedure of a dual ordination for nuns as they were encountered in the October 1982. In the last part, I focus my discussion on Korean nuns' struggle to maintain the autonomy of a dual ordination for nuns. I skip one page. At the height of the Korean War in 1951, Three nuns, Myo Snim, Myoyeom Snim, and Myohi Snim began to study Buddhist monastic disciplinary text under Master Zaun. The three nuns shared a room at the Botang Nunnery near Tongdosa and committed on foot to the monastery to study the Buddhist precept under Master Zaun. Food was more scarce than ever during the war. The three nuns openly elevated their hunger with their very meager supplies of food. They routinely gathered firewood in the mountains and began begged for alms in villages. Master Zhang.
Although it may not be possible to write a comprehensive narrative history, it is possible to construct a thematic account of some aspects of the social history of nuns and their contributions to Buddhist culture. To do this, I use inscriptions as my primary sources.
Procedures for female ordination in the Mula-Sarvastivada monastic lineage that's followed by Tibetan Buddhists. Primary resources in this effort have been Gunnar Prabhu's 5th century digest of the Vinaya and the many commentarial texts that interpret and elaborate on them. I would like to introduce into these conversations an additional resource, the narratives of women's ordinations in the root Vinaya text of the Mula-Sarvastivada tradition. These and other stories in the root Vinaya text are often omitted from the commentarial texts used by Tibetan Buddhists. Nevertheless, they offer rich resources for considering what was involved in turning individual women into bhikshunis, or fully ordained nuns. Not only do these narratives help contextualize the ordination process, as they present a fuller picture of ordination practices, most importantly, they also help assess the degree of flexibility in implementing the procedural rules of ordination. Today, we look at two such accounts from two different sections of the root Vinaya text of the Mula-Sarvastivada monastic lineage. Both stories depict women joining the community of fully ordained nuns, and both these women were later publicly recognized by the Buddha as exemplary women in the nuns' order. One of the women whose image we saw in the slides that Dr. Skellig has presented us was a prominent courtesan with a highly checkered past, and the Buddha urged particular care in making her process of going forward a flawless or perfect one. And it may surprise us to learn that the concern for creating a flawless renunciate ordination seems to have nothing at all to do with following the established rules for ordination procedures, but instead has to do with gaining social acceptance for that woman's entry into the nun's order. We may also be surprised to see that in both these ordination narratives, Buddha Shakyamuni appears to simply entrust women to Mahapajapati for ordination, a fact that hints at greater practical autonomy and responsibility for the nuns community than comes to light elsewhere. First, though, we might ask what the relation of these stories in the Vinaya is to the procedural rules governing ordination. There's a widely held belief that the stories presented in the Vinaya are there in order to depict the first instance a precept or procedural rule was articulated. In this understanding, each story serves mainly as a sort of precedent for each rule, providing some context for later legal interpreters to draw on when seeking to implement the rules. However, there are some serious issues with this understanding, particularly in the case of the Mula-Sarvastivada Vinaya. For one, this massive text runs to over 7,000 pages in its Tibetan translation and includes a tremendous amount of narrative material that is entirely unconnected to any monastic rule or code of conduct. Instead, these stories describe the comings and goings of the Buddha and his monastic assembly as they wandered from town to town. They describe the deeds